apologize if parts of this seem like a vent session, but please know, none of what I'm about to tell you has been over-exaggerated or skewed from any truth of what happened. It may even be therapeutic to express this little trauma. The year is 1991. I'm 17, and I feel like the luckiest girl in the whole town of Oxford, Indiana, because my first official boyfriend just so happens to play on the varsity football team at Benton Central High School. B-I-S-O-N, Bison came to win. Go Bison! A cheer routine and a what the fuck story is really all I've seemed to taken away from my high school experience. So now, here's the what the fuck story. Me and my boyfriend, I'll call number 22, are driving to Lafayette for a dinner movie date. It's Valentine's Day, and the next day, a small box office movie called Silence of the Lambs premieres in theaters. I'm driving because number 22 hurt his leg at Wednesday's game, probably fumbling for a loss because that's the kind of kid he was. If you're familiar with Lafayette, this takes place where Highway 52 turns into Sagamore Parkway, taking that long exit by North 24th Street, off the Ave. A couple blocks later, we reach our destination. Dinner is fine, movie was good. I don't know, is Silence of the Lambs good? It was creepy, but I don't know about good. Anyway, movie gets out. It's late, dark, and cold, and the streets are now quiet, aside from a handful of people making their departure from the theater. The sidewalks are quiet, but walking slowly beside number 22, with each misplaced limp, I can hear a kind of wincing sound. Approaching to our left is an alleyway in between two businesses. Nearing it, we begin to smell a really thick, nasty odor. Nasty enough for number 22 to jokingly ask me, "Is that stink coming from you?" I know he's joking, and I laughed, but as a 17-year-old girl, it emotionally crushed me inside. Walking past the alleyway, we see two big, scary-looking dogs tearing apart black garbage bags, digging for scraps. Feeling vindicated from his previously earth-shattering joke, I let out a laugh and pointed to the real odor culprit. That immediately gets the attention of these two dogs, and they both turn and stare at us. Adding to this off-putting behavior, one of the dogs must have found a rat because its muzzle is caked in clots of blood and sticking to it is fur. I remember number 22 getting mad at me for gaining their attention while quickening his leisured hobble to a sad trot. The dogs didn't move from their stoic positions, their gaze only broken when we passed the building's gap. The last 2 blocks to my car, number 22 fills the silence, still blaming me for almost getting us killed by those dogs. I put my keys in the passenger door to unlock it for number 22. Turning the key, I don't hear the lock pop. Instead, the door's already a crack open. Assuming number 22 probably shut his seatbelt on the door when he exited earlier, the only thing on my mind in that moment was hoping my battery still had some juice. He gets in the car and I run around to the driver's side and hop in. The dome lights don't turn on when the doors open. That's a bad sign. I attempt to turn the ignition and it starts up instantly, no problem. I'm filled with relief. Number 22 is obliviously shuffling through my tapes, using the streetlight outside coming through the windshield. I now notice the dome light still didn't come on when the car started. I reach up to inspect the dome switch, and I see that it was manually switched to the off position. All of these warnings naively passed by my youthful ignorance. I simply pulled the shifter into drive and pulled out. At a red light, I gaze into the rearview mirror, but I can't see the road behind me. I turn my head around and I fully process what's obstructing my view in the mirror. There's a man sitting in my back seat. In the 10th of a second it takes my brain to understand what's happening. He has an X-Acto knife shoved against my throat, screaming he's going to slit my throat if anyone screams. My boyfriend starts to whisper plead, "Please don't hurt me, dude," while trying to become as small as he possibly could in the passenger seat. The man orders me to keep driving, clearly noting anything divergent from his orders will result in him plunging the X-Acto knife into my organs. He starts directing me, grunting left and right as I approach intersections. Then the car would go back to silence. We pulled up to a red light and I slowly drift the car to a stop. I'd be taking a left when this light turns green. After the navigation update, the car briefly fell back to its silent state when a heavy clunk suddenly shook the car. I look to my right and I see my hero, number 22, has jumped out of the car and began sprinting down a random empty street into the darkness. The man and I watched a miracle take place as my boyfriend's leg magically healed and he cleared distance and speed, like Edward rescuing that Twilight girl from that renegade truck. But instead of saving me from the grips of peril, my man's covered a 4-block stretch, not once turning around, not even a quick glance over the shoulder to see if his impulsive, selfish decision just got me stabbed to death. Now it's just me and the man, now the blade pressed sharply against my windpipe, making sure I don't try an escape of my own. I'm terrified. It's a hopeless I've never felt. The man told me to keep driving. The light had turned green, so I turned left, opposite direction that my knight in shining armor ran. We got on the I-65 heading south. Miles go by. I hear him tell me to take an exit for Dayton, but I'm too zoned out to register it before I almost miss the exit. My jerking of the steering wheel sends his weight my way, and the X-Acto knife into my throat with a slashing motion. I didn't feel the cut, though. I only realized what had happened because I felt the blood start to drip down to my lap. I let go of the wheel and I grabbed my neck, trying to keep the 2 sliced pieces of my throat closed to slow the bleeding. We hit this exit going 70. He tried to grab the wheel, but I pushed the pedal to the floor. If I have to die tonight, I'm sure as hell taking this bastard with me. The car begins to fishtail down the off-ramp while continuing its acceleration. Air pushes through my neck each time I gather enough air to exhale. Then boom. We collide with the metal pole of a stoplight located at the bottom of the exit. The impact knocks me unconscious. When I wake up, I'm trapped in the bent metal that was once a blue Chevy Nova. The windshield is shattered, and I begin to choke on the black smoke blowing into the vehicle. I was clearly in shock by this point because I wasn't bothered anymore. Like, I was grateful that this had ended so I could finally close my eyes and die. I felt nothing when I saw his twisted body crushed under the dashboard of the passenger seat. His legs resting against the gear shift, his pant leg had caught. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and instead of going straight through the glass, his topple sent his trajectory down as the metal light pole fell forward. I blacked out multiple times. Each time I'd regain consciousness, I'd think, next time I close my eyes, they'll take me to heaven. The pain became real. Each wound I'd gained made itself known. I'd be awake until the pain would blur my vision. I'd grind my teeth and pass out. When I opened my eyes and saw firefighters pulling me out, I thought I was in hell. Seeing the ambulance lights helped me realize that I'm still here on Earth, and this searing pain is still mine to feel. Apparently, someone eventually walked down to check out what the big crash was, and they saw this mess, ran back to the gas station, and called 911. It's 2022. I still walk with a slight limp from the accident, and my neck has a 12-inch scar to remind me that I got another chance. Mentally, I've coped with this. I never forgave or spoke to number 22 the rest of that year. He was a senior, and he moved to college in 1992. I found out from a friend of mine on Facebook that he died of COVID in 2020, so out of respect for the family, I'll resist going further into his social exile at Benton Central and end my story with this. Always check the back seat before you get in your car, and be vigilant of your surroundings. In February of 2012, I went to visit my grandfather's grave for his birthday. His death was a really hard thing for me to deal with, as he died in March of 2011, and it was still very fresh to me. I was kneeling in front of his grave, with my head down, mourning and crying, when my body went into full danger is close by mode. I looked up to see a man running full sprint from the woods surrounding the cemetery, and forced myself to get in my truck as quickly as possible, without the man getting too close to me. By the time I made it to my truck, he'd gotten about 50 feet from me. I jumped in and locked the door, much to his apparent displeasure. He threw his hands up in a huff like his favorite team had just lost a football game. I started the truck and started to drive out as fast as I could, but not before driving right past him. I didn't break eye contact for a second, and neither did he, so I got a really good look at his face. Cut to a few years later, I'm at work, bored, and decided to download an app that had a ton of paranormal, cryptid, serial killer, and UFO articles. As I was browsing through the serial killers, I came across one that made my heart drop into my ass. Israel Keyes, most known for murdering an underage girl in Alaska, dismembering her body and dropping the pieces into a frozen lake. He would bury kill kits in places long before he ever committed the crimes. After the incident in Alaska, he had traveled into Texas for a wedding in a city not too far from where I lived, and had disappeared for a bit, and no one in his family knew where he was. He was arrested in that city and brought to the prison in one city over from me before he was extradited back to Alaska to stand trial. About a year ago, I found a book about him, and it provided a lot of the details I've given here. He had been killing for years, and no one knows what the actual death toll is. He actually killed himself in prison. At the end of the book about him, he described some of his favorite places to abduct people: public parks and cemeteries. I often wonder if there's a kit buried in those woods. You were fast, Israel, but I was faster, and I'm glad we didn't officially meet. So back in the day, I used to work as a bartender at a dancers club. Tips were good and I needed the money. It was work, whatever. Management was okay and the girls were mostly lovely. I actually really liked my job. The customers were pretty average to deal with, but what customers aren't? I got a lot of really horrible comments from a lot of men, but I could always stand up for myself just fine. One night, I was doing the rounds, picking up empty glasses around the main room, when I felt a hand grab me. Not aggressively, just a gentle hand around my wrist as I was near a table. And this is the weirdest thing. Normally, I'd snatch my hand back, but I made eye contact with this man and just froze. He didn't look horrifying or anything. At first glance, he just looked like an ordinary guy. He was pale, 40-ish, blonde haircut, really, really bright blue eyes. I've been checked out at work more times than I can count, but this man, there was something very different about the way this man stared at me. Honestly, the closest I've ever been to describing it is that hazed over look that cats get in their eyes when you dangle string in front of it. I didn't know what it was at the time. I still don't. But the man made my hairs stand on end. It was like my body was afraid and telling me to run, even though there was no reason to. I was like a deer in headlights. He wanted me to sit with him, and even though I wasn't allowed to, I sat down. His hand moved up my arm, began to stroke my face, so lightly he was barely touching it.
"You have beautiful skin,"
he said slowly. The way he spoke was just flat and odd. I was still frozen. He moved his hands down to my mouth. He gently pulled back my top lip to expose my top teeth.
"You have beautiful teeth."
It was like he was examining me. At this point, my entire body was screaming at me, "You need to get away from here, now." He had just started to talk about a hotel room that he'd rented, when luckily, one of the older veteran dancers came over and interrupted the interaction to flirt with him. I snapped out of it immediately. She handled the whole thing smoothly, giving me a reassuring wink as I carried the glasses off. 10 minutes later, I bumped into her backstage after she'd taken the man into a private room. I asked her jokingly how it was. She just shook her head as she rifled through her bag for makeup. "What happened? Are you okay?" I asked her, getting concerned. She looked up, giving me a serious look and shaking her head again, but slower, which meant I'm not talking about it. I left her alone and continued my shift. The following week, I went in for my regular Friday slot. I didn't see the dancer again. Apparently, she'd quit that night. Now, I know technically nothing bad happened. The man wasn't aggressive and I wasn't assaulted. I don't think he did anything too out of line in the private rooms. He would have gotten kicked out and the girls would have heard about it. I've had plenty of drunk men at the bar try their luck, so I've seen almost every trick in the book, and still, I've never encountered anyone else like him. I'll never forget the deep gut terror I experienced just being near that man. Even before he said anything, even though I didn't have an explicit reason, I just knew that something was very, very wrong. This happened a few years ago. I had gone to Walmart to buy diapers for my daughter, who was about 18 months old at the time. As I was finishing getting her strapped into the car seat after our shopping trip, a woman approached me. I quickly closed the car door and turned around to speak to this woman. She told me that her van was out of gas and asked if I could spare a few dollars. I told her that I was so sorry, but I didn't have any cash on me. She then asked if I could come with her over to the nearby gas station and use my credit card. At this point, I notice a seedy-looking van a little ways off in the distance, with a man sitting in the front seat, watching us like a hawk. I knew that I had to get out of there. I told her, "I'm sorry, but I can't help you." And I got in my car and locked the door. Sure enough, she walked over and got into that seedy van. I drove the long way home, and I made sure they weren't following me. I was creeped out, but I soon forgot about the encounter. Fast forward 3 or 4 months, I see a news story about an attempted abduction of a woman in a Walmart parking lot. They show the mugshots of the individuals responsible, and it was the same couple I had encountered months before. My blood ran cold. My husband, our children, and I have lived in the same home for almost 4 years now. The home was originally built in 1906. At the time this story takes place, we were remodeling our kitchen and bathroom. About 2 years ago, my little brother came to visit for a couple of weeks around Christmas. He was sleeping in the living room, which was probably 50 feet away from our bedroom. The second night he was there, around 3:30 in the morning, I wake up to him shaking me and standing on my side of the bed with a Mountain Dew and a bottle of water. He scared the holy hell out of me. Freaked out, I asked him what in the actual funk he was doing. He said, "What do you mean? You asked me to bring these to you." Confused, I said, "Wait, what? No, I didn't." He said, "Yes, you did. You yelled across the house for me to bring these to you." I was a little confused, but thought maybe I was yelling in my sleep and dropped it. The next day, I yelled out to him from my room while folding laundry. I yelled for him multiple times, and he never came in there. So I went to him in the living room and was like, "Really, dude? I've been calling you for 5 minutes." And he said he couldn't hear me, which really made me question the other night. A couple of nights later, around the same time, I wake up to screaming. I jump out of bed and start running toward the screaming. As I get out of our room into the hallway, my little brother is standing outside my door, crying, hyperventilating. I started panicking, like, what's going on? And he tells me that he woke up to get something to drink, walked back to the living room, and when he laid back down on the couch, I was standing at the foot of the couch, just staring at him. He said, "Dude, what are you doing?" And the figure that looked like me didn't answer, so he said my name 3 more times and asked what I was doing again. And it still didn't answer, but instead threw her head forward and looked at him, and then turned to the right and ran into the den. He said the figure was wearing the same clothes I was wearing, but her face was horrible and distorted. He was terrified and told me that he didn't want to stay at our house anymore. So he went to my mom's and stayed there for the rest of the time he was here. Now, nothing has ever happened to me in my house. My kids said some things have happened to them, but I just chalked it up to kids being kids until the other night. I was home alone and decided to take a bath. I get out of the bath and get dressed, and as I go to grab the doorknob to leave, I looked back into the mirror, and on the left side of my face was a woman's face, completely tore up. like cuts everywhere. She had gray hair and was wearing a robe with a nightgown underneath. I was so shocked I couldn't move. I went to turn and run out of the bathroom, but nothing. I couldn't move, and all of a sudden, in my left ear, I hear a whisper and a woman's voice say, "You're the only one that understands." I finally could move and ran out of the bathroom, straight outside, and called my husband. I'm still kind of freaked out by it, and if I have to go into the bathroom, I leave the door open. Nothing has happened since, and I'm really hoping nothing else does happen, because that was scary. I have noticed that it's any time we're remodeling or changing anything in the house that something paranormal starts happening. The day before this happened to me in the bathroom, we had finished putting new hardwood in the hallway. I live in Medford, Oregon, and I'll preface this by saying that I realize brass knuckles are illegal. But here's a story of how they saved mine and my boyfriend's life back in 2017. It was date night, and I met my boyfriend, who's now my husband, down at a little brewery called the Copper Plate. After a couple of drinks, we closed out the tab, and I suggested that we take a walk in the park across the street. It was a beautiful, clear night, without a cloud in the sky. Once in the park, we found a wooden bench to sit on and just watch the stars. It was actually pretty enchanting. It felt like pure magic as I soaked in the view, snuggled next to the love of my life. This perfect moment was soon interrupted by rustling in the bushes across the pathway from us. My boyfriend is in the process of feeling me up, and he stops, indicating we both feel uneasy by the sound we just heard. My boyfriend turns back around, and we're both sitting silent on the park bench, eyes locked on the shrubbery across the pathway, waiting for another sound or movement, and hopefully explanation to the sound. We hear the bushes shake again, but we don't quite see anything yet. My boyfriend whispers that it sounds too big to be a raccoon. He suggests maybe a deer. I'm about to say that it could be a bear when out steps one big red boot, followed by a heavyset man wearing a tightly stretched Pennywise clown outfit from It and full makeup. Maybe it was because I was nervous or something, but my first reaction was to laugh. It was quiet enough to where my boyfriend could hear me, but I wasn't sure the clown heard or not. But he stopped, right in front of us. After a few moments, maybe even a whole minute of him standing there, staring at us, I realized that my laugh was more of a reflex, and that I wasn't feeling very humored right then. I tightened my grip on my boyfriend's hand and asked him under my breath, what the fuck was this guy doing? He squeezed my hand back, and then he asked the guy, "Hey man, any chance you want to find another place in the park to stand and stare?" Then the clown man decided to answer the question by pulling a rather large knife out of one of his sleeves and shaking his head no. We both stand up immediately. My first thought is that this has got to be some sort of prank, but my boyfriend tells me to run across the street back towards the car. Before I can tell him to come with me, the guy charges towards my boyfriend. He lets go of my hand, sort of pushing me to the side, and prepares to dodge the guy, yelling for me to once again go back to the car. I run, but not away. There's no way I can leave my boyfriend in this situation. So, insert brass knuckles my uncle brought back from Mexico a couple of years prior. He's the guy that taught me how to fight, and I was decent at throwing a punch. These just gave me that extra power. I always kept them in my purse because what's the point of having brass knuckles if you don't have them when you need them? I grab them out of my bag, I put them on, and I wait for a good time to strike the guy. My boyfriend dodges the guy and even manages to knock the knife from his hands and kicks it off into the distance. The clown man doesn't stop, though. He again runs for my boyfriend, and this time they make contact. Now, my boyfriend is 6 feet tall, but this man has a good couple of inches on him. They both throw hands. I watch my boyfriend make contact with the clown's face, but instead of going down, he barely moves and returns a hit across my boyfriend's face. He stumbled a bit, but rushes the clown, knocking them both to the ground. It's dark, but the streetlight shows me that the two of them are wrestling on the ground. Part of me knows I should listen to my boyfriend and run to the car, but then I see the clown is on top of my boyfriend. He's fucking strangling him. Oh, hell no. Gripping my brass knuckles in my right hand, I run over to the two of them. I position myself in a fight stance behind my boyfriend's head and in front of the clown. It's like he literally doesn't even notice my presence as he tries to squeeze the life from my boyfriend. "Hey, motherfucker!" I shout in his face while pushing his left shoulder with my left hand. The moment his head tilts up at all, I hit him so hard with a solid right hook to his left cheekbone. There's blood now, and I hear a crack. I know it's not my hand that broke, so I followed it up with a second punch. But this time, he was looking straight up at me while still strangling my boyfriend. I put all of my body weight into that punch, and I could hear the brass scrape against the enamel as my fist smashed through his teeth. He flies back, and a few teeth fly out. One of his teeth lands right next to me, and if I hadn't just watched it fly out of his mouth, I'd have thought it was a kernel of corn. So yellow. This man was down and not going anywhere fast. I grab my boyfriend's arm, and I tell him that we need to run to the car. He gets up. He's in one piece, and he agrees we should go. Before running across the street, he darts back slightly and grabs the knife, telling me that if this guy gets away before the cops show up, at least he won't have a weapon. Knife in hand, we run to the car and call the police. Sitting in our car, we can't exactly see anything going on in the park. Where we were and where we left the clown is covered by tall bushes that border the park. After sitting there a while waiting for the police, I get a tinge of paranoia that they're going to arrest me or something. My boyfriend tells me no way, and I explain the brass knuckles. He tells me just to stash them, that whatever damage they find on that guy was from the two of us trying to fend him off. The police show up, and sure enough, the guy isn't there anymore. His teeth, however, were. One of the officers asks my boyfriend if the teeth are his, as he looks over his face. He tells them no, that those belong to the clown man, along with the knife. After we finish giving our statements, we sit a while longer, curious if the guy will show back up, if for no other reason than needing medical attention. My boyfriend starts talking me up, telling me how it's the most badass thing he's ever witnessed, how I'm the man of the house, praising me for saving his life, blah, blah, blah. I kiss the guy, tell him to stop, and that I'm just happy nothing worse happened to either of us. He was right, though. We make a killer team, that's for sure. So, to the clown man that fucked up my date back in 2017, I hope we do meet again, so I can knock out some more of your yellow-ass teeth. When it comes to finding out that Santa Claus isn't real, I had a pretty uniquely terrifying experience. I loved Christmas. I mean, I still do, but as a child, I absolutely could not sleep on Christmas Eve. I tried to spy Santa a million times. I'd wait for my parents to go to bed and try to sneak out of my room. They'd catch me every time. Except one year, I got close. I was in 2nd grade and young for my class, so 6 or 7 years old. I recall my best friend at school saying something like, I should pretend to be asleep, then my parents will go to sleep faster, so I could sneak out to meet Santa. It would be easier. Perfect. So Christmas Eve shows up. I'm riddled with angst, and I remember my friend's advice. Pretend to be asleep. And so that's what I did. Before A Christmas Story was even over, I started to act sleepy. I don't know how great my acting skills were, but good enough to where my dad said he should just take me up to bed. I obliged and allowed myself to be carried. When my dad left the room, I think I waited just a few moments before getting out of bed to sit next to my door. I was listening for all the key indicators that the house was sleeping. What I remember is how long it took. Forever. I actually dozed off. When I woke up, the house noises had subsided. I figured my parents had been in their room for long enough and decided to make my move. Opening my door with such grace, I slid out of the doorway and started my way to the living room. A combo of tiptoeing and sliding until I eventually reached the couch. I dove into the couch, lifted the curtains, and then I sat wrapped in a blanket, peering out the window for Santa. It was snowing, and I could have sworn I heard sleigh bells, but I wasn't seeing anyone. I had a gut-wrenching thought. Maybe he'd already come. I squirmed out of the blankets and curtains, looked at the tree and the stockings. Phew, he hadn't arrived yet. As I maneuvered back under the curtains, I was shocked to see the man himself, Santa. He's walking, though. No sleigh, no reindeer. But I'm not picky. It's Santa. I realize that he's going to pass right by my house, but he's looking all over the place, at all of the houses, in all of the windows. What's he looking for? I think to myself. Then he stops in his tracks and gives another good look around at all the houses before his eyes land on me. He sees me, and I'm ecstatic. I start waving excitedly, trying so hard not to squeal. He waves back and then looks around before he starts walking toward my window. As he approaches, I notice that he's got a bag with him, and I assume it's full of presents. He mouths or whispers the phrase, "Do you want to come say hi to Santa, sweetie?" I shake my head yes, and he points to the front door. I leave the window to walk over to the door, where there's another long window that reaches the floor. I watch as Santa tries to open the door, but it's locked. I reach for the lock, unlocking the door. He tries again. From the other side of the door, I hear him say, "Okay, sweetie, you've got to unlock the other lock, the one that's on the doorknob." So I try to do what he's telling me, but for some reason I can't quite grip the lock. My little fingers keep slipping. Santa then tells me it's okay, just go to the back door. Brilliant. I scoot over to the back door and I wait for Santa. He rounds the corner and the light from the back deck turns on. Santa is fully illuminated. And I remember thinking, wow, Santa is a lot younger than I thought he was. Skinnier, too. The light seemed to scare Santa. He almost ran away until he saw me standing there. Then he proceeded to hustle toward the door, and he was telling me and motioning that I needed to be quick. He said he had something special for me, but then he had to go. He had leaned down and was reaching for something inside his bag. I unlocked the sliding door, and I pushed my hands against the glass, and I started to push the door by walking my body in the direction I needed it to open. I'll note that even today, this door is hard to open or close if at the wrong angle, but at 6 or 7, nearly impossible. Just as he turned around, I heard the door start to give way, and as soon as it had, the home was filled with the awful sound of alarms. I took my hands away from the door to plug my ears, and I looked at Santa. He looked panicked, and I noticed he was now holding some sort of rope in one hand and the bag in the other. He drops the bag and reaches for the sliding door, and he slides it open, no problem. He then reaches for me, but before I can reach back or move or anything, I'm swept up by my mom, as my dad kicks Santa square in the chest, knocking him back several feet and landing him on his backside. That's all I saw before my mom was rushing me to their bedroom and locking the door. My mom tells me that I didn't even cry at this point, which makes sense. I don't remember crying or even being terribly upset. Not until later. It was when my parents explained that the man who came to our house wasn't Santa. And my dad kept saying things like, "She still thinks he's real. Of course she tried to let the guy in." That's when I started crying. That was all while the police were there. What happened to the guy? He got away-ish. The guy took off once he gained footing. My dad didn't bother chasing him because he'd gotten the guy's wallet. The cops were also on the phone, and the guy left his bag behind. The bag wasn't filled with presents. My dad tells me it was filled with more rope, like the kind the man was holding. There was duct tape, candy, a hammer, lots of plastic bags, and miscellaneous clothes. Yeah, it's horrifying, but luckily, he was picked up just a few minutes after he left our house. Pretty hard not to spot a guy running around town dressed like Santa Claus. In the end, I forgave my parents for ruining the magic that is believing in Santa. Because, they did save my life. This is the only time I had a threatening, skin-to-skin encounter. In June of 2019, me and a friend had decided with our girlfriends that we were going to go camping. We finally get all our stuff loaded and get in the car and put the address in the GPS. We set off on the trip, and after 3 hours of driving and 45 minutes of hearing my friend and his girl argue, we finally arrive. We get out of the car, and me and my friend begin unloading. After getting my stuff, I start getting my girlfriend's stuff. As I was, my friend was asking his girlfriend why she needed 3 bags for one night. She smiled and opened one of them. It had an ounce of weed, pre-rolls, and other goodies. Now knowing that we had weed, we had to find a place to camp that wasn't near other people. It took until sundown, but we finally found a perfect spot. We decided that after we got everything taken care of, we would eat hot dogs and smoke a blunt. We started to build a campfire to light the area so we could set up our tents, but we ran out of wood in the immediate area. So I said I would go get some while my friend stayed with the girls. I set off on my journey, and after about 2 minutes, I found some sticks to use. I started picking up the sticks, and all of a sudden, I felt someone grab my wrist. I looked up to see a man with a blank expression. For a man, he had surprisingly long fingernails, and he was digging them into my wrist while trying to grab my other wrist. I turned my head to not see his face and screamed for help, My friends shouted a response saying that they were coming. After they shouted, I immediately felt relief in my wrist. I wasn't struggling to keep my arms down, so I turned, and the man wasn't there anymore. I turned and ran as fast as I could, terrified. I met my friends and said that we had to leave immediately. I didn't even explain myself, I just wanted gone. We load up our stuff and take the long walk back. We get to the car and load our bags in. I explained what happened as we were walking back, and it scared them enough to make them want to hustle. I had a picture of my wrist immediately after, but my iPhone broke, and my iCloud wasn't backed up, so I lost that picture. I do have a picture of it now, though. It has since become a scar, which shows just how much force he put on it. I'll post a picture of it on my profile for anyone who's interested in seeing it. It was absolutely terrifying. So when I was around 2 or 3 years old, my mom and dad, now divorced, were friends with this couple who worked with my dad at his office. They would always ask to babysit me and loved seeing me a lot, and my parents thought nothing of it. One day, they asked to take me to Disney World, along with their niece. My mom had no issue with it. My dad, on the other hand, thought it was weird because they offered to pay for everything for me. He told them no and made up an excuse for me not to go. The couple wasn't seen for weeks after that, and the company my dad and they worked for were having an investigation because of that same couple who wanted to take me to Disney World. They'd committed massive fraud. They stole hundreds of thousands of dollars. They disappeared, and my dad has no idea what happened to them since he no longer works there. But he fully believes that they wanted to take me and disappear with me. He thinks that they couldn't have kids on their own and really wanted one. But it still creeps me out that I could have a completely different life and family. Thank God my dad was home because my mom wanted to let me go. This was back in the summer of 2010. I'd been living in California at the time, but was headed home to Washington to celebrate my 25th birthday. Me and 4 of my friends had rented a house on the lake for the weekend. It was near the wineries that we wanted to spend time at, and it had a pool. Not entirely necessary with the lake being there, but an added bonus. We got an amazing deal on the place, which, looking back, should have made us suspicious, I guess, but it didn't. The house was spotless, and exactly how the ad had portrayed it. We all settled in, picked our rooms, just hung out outside by the pool before deciding to hit the wineries. I was bummed that I couldn't find all of the disposable cameras I bought. It was sort of my thing. Every birthday trip, I would leave them around if it was a big group, or if there was just a few of us, I'd give every person one, and we'd just take pictures of whatever. I loved developing them and seeing what I'd missed or what we'd forgotten about. Anyways, I had one for each of us. One was missing, but we didn't bother looking for it since the shuttle had arrived to take us to the winery. When we got back, it was late. We were drunk and decided that it was a perfect time to utilize the pool, which was amazing. We turned on all the lights, just chilled out there. For some reason, the AC wasn't working, so we stayed out there for quite a bit. Suddenly, I hear my friend, we'll call her Amy. Amy says, "What was that?" Everyone sort of looks around and at her, and we all ask what she's talking about. Without saying anything, she gets off of her floaty, gets out of the pool, and walks over towards the grill. The rest of us have no idea what she's doing or what she's talking about, but then we notice that she's facing us and mouthing for us to get out and pointing at the sliding glass door. I started to put together that she walked over there to be out of view of the door. To try to understand, I also get out of the pool. 2 of my friends have gone back to sunbathing, and one is just sort of watching and waiting. Amy said that she saw someone, or thought she saw someone, walk across the front room window very quickly, but that it looked like they had walked past from inside the house. If it was outside, it would have been blocked by those thingies on the window, the frame or whatever. Because outside you'd see... I must have had a strange look on my face because she just stopped talking. Most of me knew that Amy was pretty drunk, and also that she tended to be a little bit more dramatic than the rest of us. I mean that nicely, but it's true. "I'll go check," I said in an attempt to help her not feel like I was dismissing her in any way. I stood there for a moment because there was another part of me that got nervous. By now, we were all out of the pool, sitting on the outdoor furniture under the lights. I had my cell phone over there and kept asking Amy if I should call the police, but she was sort of backtracking, saying that maybe it was the streetlights and the trees at a weird angle, that she did drink a lot, and sometimes too much chlorine can make her feel really loopy. By this time, Amy didn't even look scared, just confused and drunk, so our buzz was a little bit killed, and the 5 of us decided to go inside and investigate, half serious and half just to do it so we could move on and go to bed. We looked in every single room, nooks and crannies. There was no one inside the house. Not to mention the door was still locked. We all laughed it off, made sure to lock up real good that night and hit the hay. But not before I emailed the owners about the AC not working. The evening was very uneventful, sort of miserable, definitely tossed and turned until I finally gave up on blankets altogether. When I did that, I finally got some sleep. The next morning, Amy says that she didn't sleep very well either, that she kept waking up, but didn't know why. We chalked it up to the fact that it was super hot, and without AC, these really nice cozy blankets were sort of pointless. We got an email back from the owners that morning. They said that they were very sorry about the AC, that they had thought someone had come to fix it before we'd arrived. They'd make sure it got done today. Since it was our last day anyways, we decided to go to one of our favorite wineries, also on the lake, and hang out there for the day. When we got home that night, we honestly couldn't believe they hadn't fixed the AC. It was so hot. We had no choice but to retreat back to the pool. Even though we'd been in the water all day, we couldn't be in the house. I went to change into a different swimsuit, but I couldn't find it anywhere. Thinking that someone had grabbed it, I went to ask the girls if they borrowed it. When I did, one of my other friends was standing there in the kitchen, looking at the refrigerator. "Did you do that?" Earlier, we'd spelled out our names and made a palm tree with the magnetic letters on the fridge. But it was no longer there. Instead, they were all rearranged in the shape of a large smiley face. I hadn't done that, and obviously she hadn't either. I wasn't convinced this was spooky yet. I was more focused on how I really wanted to take a picture of our names and the art before we messed it up. I told my friend I didn't do that, and at this point, actually forgot that I was looking for my bathing suit. We all got into the pool, and as we were in this very pleasant place, we joked about how we were going to try to get a full refund on this place for the AC being messed up. After swimming, we busted out a huge fan that we found in the garage and sent off another email to the owners. Not asking for a refund, but explaining the problem wasn't fixed and hoping they'd offer some sort of relief or explanation. At the very least, letting these people know that they'd hired somebody who was completely unreliable. That night, we all decided to put the big fan in the living room, open all the windows, and just eventually fall asleep there since it was cooler than the bedrooms. We were all watching Zombieland, and when I got up to use the restroom, I could have sworn I saw a shadow that was coming from the top of the stairs near the 2 back bedrooms that had mine and Amy's things in them. I stood there a moment and listened. I didn't hear anything, but I still felt creeped out. This was the first time I felt creeped out. I started to walk up the stairs, and I could see that the hanging light in the hallway was moving a bit. I sort of rushed back to the living room and explained myself, stating, I know it could be nothing, but we should check it out. We all decided to go, but not before Amy and the others put out there that they thought this place was haunted. Also saying that if it was a ghost, we should leave it alone. I was more worried about an animal, or at least confirming it's just a ghost moving things around. Exploring felt better than trying to sleep, not knowing. I had convinced them that we should check it out. This time we gathered some weapons. We made light of it, but only because we were all sort of scared. We found nothing, except my bathing suit. It was in the upstairs bathroom that I had already checked earlier before swimming. When I told them this, they were even more convinced that something strange was going on. We stuck to our decision to just sleep all together in the living room that night. Again, hot as hell, just trying to get comfortable. Sometime early the next morning, we woke up freezing cold. The AC was working. A little late, but whatever. We all sort of groaned about it and made our way to our rooms to get some more sleep before the sun came up. When I got to my room and laid in bed, I felt something hard under the covers. It was a disposable camera. The one I lost, I was sure of it. I threw it in my bag and fell asleep. As we were leaving, we did a final sweep to make sure that no one left anything behind. We were all in the kitchen just talking about what a great time we'd had, that we loved the pool, blah, blah. When my friend looks at the refrigerator and says, "Aw, who ruined our beautiful art?" Me and my other friend look at each other. The smiley face was a sad face now. I looked back at the other two and said, "Wait, who actually ruined the masterpiece? Because we thought one of you two did." None of us had touched the magnets. We swore on everything, and with that, we decided to get the hell out of that place. We had a great time, but mostly outside of the house itself. This was one too many things that led us to feel something eerie was going on. Fast forward 3 months. I finally get around to developing all of the pictures from the trip. By the time I get to the 3rd roll, I'm completely horrified. 25 pictures of me and my friends sleeping. I knew instantly these weren't the kind of pictures any of us would take of each other. For so many reasons. The top reason being that we're not creepy individuals who like to look at each other sleep. Whoever took these pictures was right there. I kept thinking that as I frantically flipped through them. Every crazy thought went through my mind at that time. From the owners being crazy stalkers to a ghost taking phantom photos. I was now on the last set of photos looking for anything else creepy. Then chills. Chills all over my entire body. A picture of all of us. Squeezing into frame, standing with the pool and the house in the background. A man in the upstairs window. The window in the room I was staying. You can't see all the details of the man, but you can see a man, not a ghost, looking at us. I called every single one of my friends and told them what I found. After a good deal of freaking out, one of my friends said that she was going to have her dad reach out to the owners of the house who had posted the rental listing. He was a lawyer and was very angry. This seemed like the safest route for us to take care of it. What seemed like forever later, we found out that the couple had originally listed the house, had pulled it down. After our stay, a family had rented the house. Apparently, the father reported hearing noises in the home. He ended up calling the police, where they found a man in the attic. Apparently, he had worked for the company that the couple had hired to fix the air conditioning unit. My friend's dad said that it wasn't really a company. It was more under the table. He worked with the local police and provided our photos as evidence against the man whom they were able to locate a few months later. We're much more careful with our rentals now, especially because we have no real proof that this couple had nothing to do with it. All we know is that people can be scarier than ghosts.
In the mid-90s, in rural Ohio, children are free-range, smartphones are non-existent, and I'm a quiet, shy fourth grader. That summer, my mom became good friends with a couple who owned a large, beautiful flower farm. Most weekends, they would host friends and family for bonfires and s'mores. The adults would drink grown-up beverages, and the kids would explore and play. On the particular evening of this encounter, we had just settled in beside the fire when my mom stiffened beside me. She turned to me and said, "I don't want you and your brother wandering off. Just play here where I can see you." Now, this was unusual and kind of a bummer to my kid self. But she was regularly so lenient that I begrudgingly went along with it. After our s'mores were eaten and before the sugar rush ensued, my mom gathered us to wash our hands. Once again, this seemed odd. I was completely capable of using the restroom on my own, as was my younger brother. As we were rounding the corner to the house, we passed a man that we'd not previously met. My mother grabs both of our hands tightly and speed walks us up to the back door, closing the screen door and locking the glass door behind her. In my memory, she was composed, but she later told me that she felt breathless and panicked, like a wild-eyed animal. Not long after, we hit the road to get home for bed and church in the morning. I remember thinking that I wish we could stay and play longer, or even camp there overnight like we did sometimes. But oh well, my child mind did not connect anything odd about the whole situation. It would be many years later, when I was an adult, that my mother would tell me a story I'll never forget. She remembers all the same details, the bonfire, the s'mores, the sugared-up kiddos, and the sticky marshmallow hands. But she also clearly remembers the sudden feeling of inescapable dread in the pit of her stomach, and the hackles rising on the back of her neck. Even in front of the bonfire, her blood ran icy cold. She told me that all she could think was, "It's time to go. We need to get out of here." She said it was the most persistent feeling of urgency she's ever felt. She then told me that the next day at church, she asked her friend, who the new man at their home was that night. He replied, "That is my brother. He just got released from prison for child molestation and assault. He and I have never gotten along, but he has nowhere else to go. I asked him to go somewhere else for the evening, but he just showed back up at the house. No warning. I would never have allowed him near children." Her jaw almost dropped to the floor. She told me that before she'd even seen him on the way back to the house, she felt his presence. She kept looking into the darkness beside the house and feeling like she was being watched. She knew instinctively her children were in harm's way, and she needed to get us somewhere else. She didn't question it or blow it off. She listened to her gut, and I'm thankful she did. The feelings she experienced that night were so intense, we never went back to their home again. Friends, please always listen to your instincts and be safe out there. We were arriving at my friend's coworker's house after work. There were 5 of us, and her boyfriend was already home. It was around 10:30 p.m., and as we entered the small duplex, I locked the front door behind me from habit. Not 30 seconds after I made it to her bedroom, 5 feet away, I heard someone trying to open the front door. I proceeded to ask if she or her boyfriend were expecting anyone over, and they said no. Her boyfriend went to the door as the person outside started knocking. We looked outside to see someone in a hoodie, pulled all the way over where his face was obscured from the side. Her boyfriend asked through the door what he needed, and he answered that he was locked out of his house. He needed to borrow a phone. Her boyfriend told him no, and the guy says, "Come on, man, just open the door." We said no and to leave. There was a 24-hour gas station literally across the street. 15 minutes later, I see someone peek into the living room, and someone again tried to open the door. We all come to the door and yell through, telling him to leave. He keeps saying, "I don't know why you can't just open the door. Just open the door and let me use your phone." We said no, and he eventually left. While he was outnumbered, we didn't know if there was someone with him hiding, if he had a gun, etc. What mainly freaked me out was that he kept trying the door before knocking. When I was in my early 20s, I had an apartment right off a major road, adjacent to a gas station. They had this deal where you pay $10 for a cup and get free refills for a year. I love unsweetened iced tea, and they actually keep theirs fresh. I got to know the staff pretty well and went probably once or twice a day. They even gave me an award for favorite customer, which was crazy sweet. One day, I was tipsy with a friend, going for more beer, and there was a man with a super cute puppy. We asked if we could pet it, and the little monster jumped in my arms, and my beer-warmed heart melted. He tells me the dog is blah blah certified. It was actually a flea-encrusted mutt, and I loved him. So he would sell him to me for $800. After letting him know I couldn't afford a dog, then thanking him for letting me play, I tried to set the bugger down, but it cried and clawed its way back to me for kisses. Jokingly, I said, "Well, I guess he chose me." I took 2 exaggerated and slow steps away, and then I asked him for help to get the noodly puppy so I could wander off to Beer Town. Sad to leave my new furry soulmate, but I didn't think anything negative about it until the next day or 2. I go to get tea and say hello to my friend, the cashier, when she starts freaking out. The puppy-selling guy had come in and interrogated the woman about who I am and where I live. He came back with a video camera to record her. Then, he called the cops to report me and I guess force them to give up my secret identity. Meanwhile, I was literally in eye view on the second-story balcony, smoking cigarettes and cramming like 6 people into my tiny ledge. The cops left because he's obviously unbalanced and was forced to leave as well. That wouldn't stop our hero of the story, though. He was fighting for his puppy's welfare after I ruthlessly tried to steal him and, I don't know, eat him? Maybe my kisses were menacing. He had a very noticeable truck. It had a camper on the back, covered in psalms and creepy Jesus conspiracy bullshit painted on the actual truck. He would park outside and wait for my return. The staff all bonded together and didn't know me or where I lived or anything about the ginger bitch. I would check out my window before rushing in to get updates and truly thought that he would move on. One night at 3 a.m., someone starts pounding on my door. I call the cops. Psalm truck is in the driveway, but gone before the cops arrive. I ask to put a restraining order, but apparently a vague description of a describable truck is not enough. 3 a.m. the next night, the night after that, I get a letter. But I shit you not, it's written on the back of a Bud Light lime box. It offers me a white kitten and college tuition if I give this anonymous novelist a call. I had a tuxedo cat that loved to sit in the window and scream. So I brought the Bud Light lime offer to the police station, and one of the guys was in tears laughing, as was I, while apologizing because he knew how terrified I was, but it was a super freaking awkward situation. I had 2 police cruisers parked outside my house for a good month. It was a good spot to await danger anyway. I remember one day there was a half-naked man stabbing a tree in my yard, and the same cop showed up and pointed at me on the second-story balcony, laughing, and then came up and had a beer after his shift. Life is weird. I have photos of the Bud Light lime offer, so I'll post them here. Back in 2016, my friends and I, for the longest time, had been itching to go camping at our local campsite. It was in Los Padres National Park in Southern California. When we found the perfect weekend to go, one that didn't interfere with any of our work schedules, we set the date. 3 days before the trip, we found out that we were going to get hit by the El Niño rainstorm. Us, being the types of dudes that we are, didn't care if we got hit by the storm while camping. So we packed up our cars and made the 45-minute drive to the campsite. The campsite was a family-friendly one, with about 100 camping lots that circled around the clearing in the forest. We found the perfect spot underneath a huge thick of trees that would help block as much rain as possible, and it helped out that the restrooms were only 30 yards away. As soon as we got to our spot, we took advantage of the afternoon sky being clear for the moment, and we rushed to set up our tents. The layout that we made was that we pitched our tents close to one another, where our tent doors were only 6 feet apart. The reason why we did this is because in order to combat the rain, I bought a 30-foot by 30-foot thick blue canopy tarp that I threw over and under our tents to cover us from the rain above, but also from the rain that would be running through the ground. It was a genius move on my part, but whenever you would walk around our tent, you would be making so much noise from crunching the plastic tarp. Hours passed and we were all around the campfire. It was late into the evening, and this was the first time that I noticed that there were barely any other campers. They were mainly camping in their RVs like the fake campers they were. In my honest opinion, They were the smart ones, unlike my friends and I that were sleeping in 2 small tents, with our only protection being the blue tarp. I was getting tired from the long day's work, and I decided I was going to go conk out. My friends followed my lead as well. The sleeping arrangements were that I had my friend Ray sleeping in my tent, and AJ and S were sleeping in theirs. Before I called it a night, I whispered to Ray and I told him, I'm going to prank call S and AJ, but I'm not going to say anything. Ray smiled as I dialed my friends up. I called them unrestricted, and S's phone started to ring. Both of them, being the way they are, got timid very easily, and they said to one another, Who's calling you this late at night? I don't know. They called me unrestricted. Are you going to answer? Of course not. Ray and I were holding in our laughter as they ignored our call. I decided to do it one more time. Once their phone started to ring, they started to freak out once again, and they said, Who is it this time? Same person, I think. I'm going to answer. As they did answer, S said in a very shaky tone, Hello? Ray and I had to hold in our laughter as we kept as quiet as possible, not wanting to make any noises that would give off that it was us. I held the phone close to my mouth as I began to breathe heavily, in a murderous way. I ended the call, and just hearing them freak out the way they did was making my night even more fun. Me, being the idiot that I am, called them one more time, and this time, S picked up the phone immediately and said in a tough voice, Look, whoever this is better stop. I'm about to call the cops if you keep on calling. This is not a threat. Ray and I looked at one another as we, at the same time, began to fake moan so loud and immediately started to bawl out in laughter. AJ and S were so mad at us for pulling this prank on them. They were cursing us out. Me, finally calming down from laughing so loudly, told the boys, Good night, I'll have pancakes ready in the morning. Since I fell asleep relatively easily, I was out in a matter of minutes, while Ray, AJ, and S were up for a while longer. I was the first of my friends to wake up in the morning, and as I promised, I had the pancakes already cooking by the time everybody else woke up. The smell of me cooking woke up my friends one by one. They got out of their tents, and as we were eating, AJ spoke up and said, Hey Jay, the prank you pulled last night went a little too far. Yeah, you had us ready to run to our car and take off. Me, feeling a bit guilty, apologized and said, Sorry guys, my bad. Yeah, it's one thing to prank call us like that, but then to walk around our tent and then to go inside of it in the middle of the night, that's just totally off limits, S said. Me, not knowing what they were talking about, said, What do you guys mean? Come on, still with the jokes. You were the one that was walking around our tent and you walked in. Ray spoke up and said, That wasn't Jay who was walking around. I thought that was you two getting your revenge on us for scaring you. That wasn't us doing that. It was you two. So, to explain, after I fell asleep, about an hour had passed where Ray, S, and AJ were still up, and all was quiet in the forest until the sounds of footsteps were heard, stepping on our blue tarp that was on the ground. At first, my friends thought that it could have been just a forest animal wandering, but the heavy footsteps were a dead giveaway that it was a person, as they described. The person was walking around their tents, all of them, making constant figure eights. The person would place their fingers on the tent's fabric walls to run them up and down. The footsteps finally stopped after a couple of minutes, right in between our tent doors. The three of them were already having their hearts pounding out of their chest. It was silent for a long minute until the sound of the tent zipper being slid open was heard. As AJ says, the tent's door was only opened halfway, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. But in the darkness, both S and AJ saw the silhouette of a man's face pop his head into the tent to look at both of them. AJ and S faked being asleep the entire time, but they kept their eyes locked on the man. The man then opened the tent fully and walked inside the tent, just standing at the entrance. The man didn't say a word or do anything, just watched the both of them, laying in their sleeping bags. After their longest minute ever, the man just took his steps out of the tent, and his footsteps were heard walking away, disappearing into the night. The entire time that this was happening, S and AJ thought that it was either me or Ray doing this, and Ray thought that it was AJ or S doing this. Back to us arguing back and forth at the breakfast table. We were interrupted by a man walking through our campsite, and he said, "Good morning, boys. How did the four of you sleep last night?" This man spoke with a smoker's voice, as if he'd been doing that for all of his 45 years of being alive. He wore a dirty, sweat-stained white t-shirt that looked more gray at this point, and his blue jeans looked as if they'd never been taken off of his body. He smelt like liquor, not a good sign at 8 in the morning, and his words were just mumbling around. We didn't say a word to this guy, as he then asked us if we had any cigarettes to spare him. I said that we didn't smoke, and he said, "Oh well, you boys want to visit me in my RV? Just stop by anytime." The man continued to walk away, towards the restrooms, and as he was done using it, he walked back to our campsite. He didn't say anything this time, but he looked at us and gave us a nearly toothless smile, and he walked back to his RV. I took note of his RV, as it was the only RV that stuck out as being dirty and more run down than the others. We quickly summed up the man as the person who was walking around our tents last night, and S and AJ now remembered that they smelt liquor from the person who was standing in their tent. We all agreed that we would keep an extra eye out on this guy, and if he did spend another night, we would most likely report him to the park rangers if he tried anything else. Well, it was around lunchtime now, and the man came back, not to use the restroom, but just to talk to us. "So any of you boys interested in buying an RV? Y'all can go check it out right now, see if you want to buy it. I don't need it anymore since my wife left me. Just check out the inside of the RV." "No, we are good, sir," I said with a visible, threatening tone. The man seemed to notice this, and he walked away. The man did end up leaving a few hours before sunset, but the entire time that he was there, he kept glancing at us. The man had his RV about 50 yards away from us, and I noticed that he had a restroom right next to his RV. Why did he make an effort of walking all the way over to our campsite to use our restroom? Also, why did he even use ours if RVs come with restrooms installed in them? Whatever the man wanted, we were just glad that we were about to enjoy the rest of our weekend. This is my crazy lady living in the attic story. I'm just going to start with how we found her. It was 4 a.m. and I couldn't sleep, so I got up to go to the bathroom, and I saw that the attic door was pulled down and the downstairs light was on. I stayed in my room, and the second I heard the attic door close, I opened the door to find no one there. I checked my brother's room and my parents' room, and everyone was sleeping in their beds. I woke my dad up and told him what was going on. My dad grabbed his pistol, and my mom called the police, while I had to get my brother up. Cops came quickly. They went up into the attic with my dad. They came down with a dirty, old, crazy-looking lady who had chocolate all over her face. We checked the attic and found, stowed behind a bunch of pink wall foam, one of our sleeping bags, a dirty bucket that she would clearly piss and shit in, a small flashlight, a bottle of Febreze, a small kitchen knife, and a bunch of water bottles, soda cans, protein bars. She said she lived up there for a few months. We moved all of our stuff up there in September, so the longest she could have lived here is 3 months. And she said that she got in because someone left our patio door open while we were walking our dogs. We live in a townhouse, and the patio is on the 2nd story. So that means that she Assassin's Creeded into my house. So I don't know if she actually got in through the patio or not. She said the knife was for self-defense in case she got caught, but I'm not buying it. Besides the occasional footsteps that we assumed were just house noises, a light would be left on when we woke up every so often. We had no idea. But today I realized something. Me and my dad went up there at the end of November to get Christmas stuff. And all of our Christmas stuff was on the other side of the attic from her nest, meaning she was probably up there when we were moving stuff. And if she had had the knife, she could have easily killed us. Creepy to think about. This happened during the cold snap earlier this year, when our city got a significant, for us, dumping of snow, and temperatures plummeted and held at 0 degrees Fahrenheit. My current neighborhood is rough. I hear gunshots on a weekly basis and don't check local incident reports to keep my sanity. So despite loving walks at night, since I'm a woman without a large dog, I never get to go. That was until the night of our blizzard. There was about 8 inches on the ground, and the city was so underprepared, they weren't bothering to plow the neighborhoods yet. Combined with the extreme temperatures, I figured it would be safe to go out, though I did call up a local friend. We had a great time and had that beautiful, sparkling, silent world pretty much completely to ourselves. Combined with the pandemic, no one was driving, literally. So when a white car with a dent on the back went past us after my friend's feet couldn't take it anymore and we were walking back, it was extremely noticeable. Closer to our respective houses, we parted ways. Only 3 more blocks to go for me. That's when the white car drove past me again from behind. Extremely slowly, but I just knew it wasn't only from the snow. I was on instant high alert and started sweating despite the cold. The car would have had to turn around to come back past me on a side street nonetheless, and conditions were so bad that it just didn't make sense. I was on their right but quickly crossed behind them to the left, closer to home. They came to an even slower stop, about 20 feet ahead of me, in the very center of the uncleared road, and idled. Then, a man got out from the passenger's side and casually crossed over to the driver's side and acted like he was going to lean on it as I approached. But my instincts were screaming, and I took off at a slippering sprint down the untouched alley that was mercifully between me and the car. I'm so glad I splurged on fancy lightweight snow boots, but adrenaline certainly helped to make that burst of athleticism possible. The snow was my savior, since they couldn't turn around, and a regular car would have almost certainly gotten stuck if they tried to follow. The man immediately shouted something after me. I think it was, "Hey, we're not going to hurt you," but pretty much negated it by getting back in the car and driving off. So, not even sub-zero temperatures will deter creeps from looking for victims. Listen to your instincts and scope the exits. This is a story that happened many years ago when I was around 8 or 9. My parents and I lived in a very beautiful, big old house. It used to be a hotel in the 19th century. The house had 4 extra apartments, and in one of them lived this middle-aged guy who we'll call F. The house was placed on a very small but long road that went between fields and a small forest, all of it going downhill before it ended right by the beach. There were maybe 15 houses and only one other kid my age, so I'd sometimes visit with the adults in the area. There were a few incidents with F, the guy that rented one of the apartments. The first one happened when my friend and I were roller skating and we met F, who was out on his bicycle. We asked him if he would tow us because we were tired, and he let us hold on to his bike. At first, we thought that he was great because not all adults would have been okay with that idea. But the ride didn't go so well. Once we held onto the bike, he started going faster and faster. And I mean really fast. It was summertime, and we only had on shorts and skirts. Back then, we also didn't have a lot of protective gear, so we absolutely didn't want to fall down. We started out by politely asking him to go slower, but he didn't listen at all. Then we started getting near a really big hill, where gravity would always make you go way too fast. When we were there, we'd always zigzag our way down to make it down safely. At this point, we were screaming at him to stop, but he did the opposite and was standing up on the bike so that he could go faster. And then he told us to let go of the bicycle if we didn't like it. But there was no way that we could have done that without falling, and he knew it. Even if he didn't know, he could clearly hear the fear in our voices. But he didn't stop before we were a good bit past that hill, and when we confronted him afterwards, he just said he only did what we wanted him to, and that it was our own fault. The second incident is the real creepy encounter that I had with this guy, but at the time, I just thought it was a bit weird. My mother, on the other hand, got really mad, and as an adult, I now understand why. I had met F in the driveway, and he invited me in for a cup of tea. I remember sitting on his couch and not liking the tea because it had no sugar. When I asked for some, he refused to give me any. Maybe he said he didn't have any, but anyways, I didn't like the tea, and he kind of forced me to drink it anyways, saying how I was the one who wanted it, and how he went through all the trouble of making it, and so on. He got kind of mad, so I did what he told me to do, because he was an adult, and I was only a child. That evening, I told my mom, and she right away took the phone and called him. And then she yelled at him for endangering us girls when we were roller skating, and got even more angry when she told him to never, ever invite me to his apartment, and especially to never force her little girl to do anything whatsoever again. This could be the end of the story, but actually, I met a guy about 10 years later, and he told me that F had informed him that I was the kind of girl that just needed to be cornered and pressured a bit, and then I'd put out. Yikes. My big love bug of a parrot is well trained, and I take him out into the world on his harness. He loves it, and it's really stimulating and enriching for him. He is really cool, so I don't blame people for it necessarily, but he tends to attract a lot of attention. We live in a small tourist town, so it's not just the regulars and locals that I deal with. I never really know what to expect. Most of the time it's harmless, just someone curious about him. I'm pretty socially awkward, and sometimes it's really good for me to talk to the public about him. However, sometimes it puts me in weird, sketchy, uncomfortable situations. It's not uncommon for people to corner me, block my path, or chase me down, yelling things like, "Excuse me, hey, stop, can you stop? Come back, I want to see the bird." Please, don't do this. The weird ones almost always ask, "How much is he worth?" Red flag. To which I try to change the subject or say something vague. The extra rude ones always keep pushing. "Yeah, but how much?" Anyway, this one particular day, I had enough of the harassment. I wanted a peaceful day out for us. So I walk with my bird to this quieter end of town. Usually just the odd locals walking by. There's a footpath, a grassy hill, and a beach at the bottom. I'm by myself, so I make sure to have us sit a ways down the grassy hill in a spot where I can see people coming from both directions. We sit down with our smoothie. My bird immediately dives in and starts ripping up the grass. He's in his happy place. I'm hanging out, playing on my phone, playing with my bird, and watching my surroundings. I'm thinking, all right, this is great. There's been barely anyone. Those that have walked by haven't really noticed us. We're far enough away from the path that for anyone to approach us would be exceptionally awkward. They'd have to walk well off the path and down the hill to get to us. There's maybe going to be the occasional dog person that walks by. Dogs are meant to be on a leash here, but I know that people don't always listen, so I stay vigilant. We've got some shade and are happily sharing our smoothie and playing in the grass. Life is good. Then I notice this man walking along the footpath. He has a schnauzer dog, and it's one of those horrid retractable leashes that no one ever seems to use correctly, but alas. I notice him, then he notices me. Usually dog people are pretty good about keeping a distance. He walks along, sweet. Then the dog notices us. He runs towards us, to the very end of his retractable leash, and is jerked to a halt at the end, barking savagely. I think, okay, he's going to pull him back, to which he does. Phew. I look away for half a second, and then he lets him off the leash. The dog flies towards us. My bird lets out an alarm call and backs up to me as it happens, and I instinctively scoop him up and throw him on my shoulder, standing up and dropping my smoothie in the grass. The dog is leaping at me from uphill, scratching me, all the while barking and acting all savage and inconsolable. Amidst protecting my feathered companion and fighting off this tiny bearded asshole, I manage to utter, "What the fuck? Not cool, get your dog." The man is casually walking towards us, laughing hysterically, with no intention of stopping the chaos. I'm still being attacked by his vicious little dog. Again, I exclaim, "Are you fucking kidding me? Get your dog off of me." This one got his attention. "What did you just say to me, little girl?" he says with some accent, maybe German. "I said get your dog the fuck away from us. This isn't funny." He's directly in front of me now. Stops laughing. "You better watch your mouth. You don't know who you're talking to," he says and proceeds to snatch me by my wrist. Also, please remember, this stupid dog is still savagely jumping on me and trying to get my bird. I haven't ever been physically grabbed like that by a stranger, and I yelled, louder and more ferociously than I probably ever have at another human, screaming to get the fuck off of me, and I jerked my arm back. I miraculously broke free of his grip, and as I did, he geared up to backhand me. He took a swing, and I leapt back, screaming to get away from me. "You need to take better care of your pet," he says. "You have no idea who you're talking to." Thankfully, another old man who was walking along the footpath now came out from the corner and saw the commotion. He immediately ran down and intercepted another swinging backhand coming my way and kicked the dog off of me. The evil old German-ish man continues to threaten me and tells me to take better care of my pet. Again, while the nice man shoos him away. He finally collects his dog and backs off. He slowly trails away, shouting insults and yanking his dog along. The nice man sits with me for a minute in the grass until we're sure that he's gone. I was shaken up, literally shaking, and he kind of talked me down. It was a stressful walk home, alone. I stopped for no one and was constantly looking over my shoulder. Luckily, it seems that my bird forgot about the whole incident pretty quickly and was back to his cheery little self that evening. I, unfortunately, did not. It still frightens me going anywhere alone now, and it's safe to say, when I do, I'll be putting up with the annoying tourists from now on. Years ago, my mornings and evenings involved me taking the subway to and from work. Every once in a while in the evenings, I'd hear beautiful saxophone music, even before walking down the steps from the loud streets. Reaching the bottom near the end of the terminal, I'd see a small, older man sway back and forth, an overgrown beard hiding his lips pressed firmly against a dented, rusty sax. Always in the same oversized coat and a Knicks hat, he dressed for warmth, clearly rejecting the passing fads that walked by him. Whether by choice or circumstance, to say it politely, he stood out in the crowd of suits and Jordans that ignored his presence. But I'll never deny how talented this man was on the sax. One night, I reached the subway early and heard that sax playing below. It was winter, and I had a couple of dollars in my pocket I'd won from a scratch ticket earlier that day. I remember thinking, maybe God gave me this money so I could give it to this guy tonight. Maybe that's why I got here early. I've enjoyed this man's music for so long, from a distance. He'd never known my attention was grasped by it all. Inspired to show him how much he brightens my trips home, I took the $3 out of my pocket and walked over. His saxophone case was closed, so I took the rest of the change out of my pocket and set a couple of coins on top of the dollar bills so they wouldn't fly off. That's when he stopped playing his saxophone. He slowly turned his head to look at me, reminiscent of an animatronic doll. His stare was lifeless and cold. Genuinely confused about the sudden atmospheric change, I started to apologize if I had interrupted him and began to tell him the whole reason I made my way over to him that night. I tried to, at least. Up until he interrupts me saying something like, "Are you with them?" With a quick glance left and right, I saw no one else around us. A couple people waiting for the L train, but nobody close enough to mistake my association with. So I say, no, I just wanted to tell you how much I love your music. He goes, "No, they sent you after me, didn't they?" Then he takes a step towards me. I'm realizing this isn't the situation I had envisioned being in when I made the choice to approach. So, in an attempt to end this interaction as fast as possible, I start backing up and saying, "Nope, not me. I'm sorry, just liked your music. I'll leave." As I retreat, this man keeps shouting accusations towards me and then begins walking to follow me. Thankfully, I hear the L train coming up the tracks, and right when the doors open up, I jump on and find a seat at the last train car. But just before the doors close again, guess who steps on board? Saxophone man, scanning the empty seats. Living in New York, I'm no stranger to your occasional mentally ill person. Even up to this point, I didn't conceptualize the backlash my good deed could bring. As the doors close behind him and the subway starts to move, his eyes meet mine, and he starts yelling at me again, calling me government lady. The only other two people on the L are doing their best to ignore the drama unfolding. Saxophone man has the money I set down on his case, and he throws the change and dollar bills at me. I duck, and I hear the change crash on the wall behind me and splash onto the floor. From pure shock and disbelief, I just started repeating, No, please stop. I don't know you. I work at Chipotle on 3rd Avenue. I show him the work shirt that I'm still wearing from my shift, but that doesn't deter his aggression. For some reason, I think it made him more mad because, and I'm literally not over-exaggerating in any way, this is exactly how it went. I say I work at Chipotle and I show him my shirt. He calls me a lying bitch and spits in my face. I start screaming, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" Tears join the spit running down my cheek, and I just cover my head with my hands and ball up screaming, "No." In retrospect, that was my fight or flight moment, but I chose option 3, turtle up and scream. This must have gotten the attention of the other 2 passengers, because I can hear one of them get up and walk over, asking, "What's going on?" And again, here's an exact play-by-play of what happens next. My eyes are closed and tucked between my legs, but I can hear everything that's happening. Passenger 2 comes up and says, "Hey, what's going on?" Saxophone man turns around, snorts another loogie up, and spits it in this guy's face. Then, boom, 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 boom. Train doors open and footsteps run away. I keep my eyes closed and I keep screaming while running out of the doors and as far away as I possibly could from that subway. It wasn't even my exit. I walked the rest of the way home that night in the snow. I called the cops when I got home, but they didn't really care, saying they already received a call about it and got some officers checking it out. The next phone number I dialed was my boss. Thankfully, my boss at the time was super cool and totally understood why I needed a couple of days off. But the world keeps spinning and life continues. Time passes and years go by. A new job sends me to a different part of town along with a different stop, now off of Broadway. A quiet Saturday night rolls around and one of my girls calls to see if I want to meet up for drinks on the Ave. We party, the night comes to a close, and our new plan is to crash at my place. Going through the turnstile, my friend goes, "Do you hear that?" I say, "What?" And she says, "That beautiful sax. Someone's really grooving down there." I listened. It was soft and sweet, a style reminiscent of a musician I admired long ago. This instantly sobers me and makes the hairs raise on my arm. Real cold shivers kind of stuff. It scared me. The tones were so familiar. In that moment, my drunk brain was thinking it's either A, the homeless sax man from my memories survived the 4 gunshots. Well, I don't want to run into that again. Or B, it's the ghost of the homeless sax man haunting these subway terminals. And I don't want to run into that. I'm like, oh, no thank you. And the best 84.62 I ever spent was on the taxi I hailed to take us home that night. Before I met my coworker, he held some sort of managerial position at a store that sold shoes. For over a year, he received phone calls from a man who claimed to be inquiring about women's shoes. Due to this, he he was only interested in speaking to female members of staff. Whenever he was able to speak to a female member of staff, he would ask her about the shoes that she wore and how comfortable they felt. According to my coworker, these calls would take place almost daily. The caller seemed pleased to hear about shoes that were not sold in the store he was allegedly calling to inquire about. Thinking this was strange, my coworker warned another shoe store in the area about the caller. The manager of that store claimed that they had been receiving similar calls. The caller never seemed to actually be interested in buying shoes. My coworker blocked his number on 2 separate occasions, but he would simply change phone numbers. After having his number blocked for a 3rd time, he began actually entering the store and making women uncomfortable. My coworker banned him from entering the store and accused him of involving unwilling participants in his fetish. The man calmly denied making the phone calls. He also claimed that his interest in shoes was not sexual. He left the store, but ended up returning about a month later. My coworker started shouting at the man, but he allegedly remained eerily calm. The store closed down less than a year later. According to my coworker, a strange car began pulling up outside of his apartment complex and remaining there for hours. He mentioned this to me a few months ago, but I wasn't sure what to make of it. I've experienced stalking, but it's hard to link the mysterious car to the man from the shoe store. Recently, however, I noticed that a strange man always seemed to follow us around during our lunch breaks. He wouldn't say anything. He would only stare at us. After I pointed out his presence, my coworker informed me that he recognized the individual as the shoe-obsessed man who began calling the store years prior. By now, it's been almost 2 years since my coworker left the shoe store, but I've only known him for a few months. Earlier today, I received a friend request on Facebook from a name I didn't recognize. I recognized the profile picture as the man who'd been following us. I rarely use Facebook and have never been Facebook friends with the coworker that man initially started targeting. That coworker claimed to have deleted his Facebook account upon being made aware that man was following him again. He suspects that the man used Facebook to track him down at his new job, but he also claimed to be certain that his address wouldn't have been on Facebook. He still remains certain that the car that waits outside his house is the shoe-obsessed stalker. I believe him.
In dreams, the interactions and settings are often stitched similar to a fragile quilt. Memories crudely sewn together, tattered pieces of cloth familiar to the touch, forming a unit unquestioned of flaws. Only with closer examination do the patterns feel misplaced. Like this, as consciousness takes hold, the details of dreams are forgotten, torn and abandoned, quickly replaced with thoughts of what the new day will bring. But in my dreams, there's a town that I visit from time to time that has never changed. Though I've never been to this place in real life, in my dreams, I've walked each sidewalk enough to remember it as if I have. The town's layout became vivid, not through the fabric of memory, but through the hours of exploration I've managed to accumulate while amidst my slumber. From the ice cream parlor with the neon blue trim to the fountain at the roundabout, every brick remains untouched by alterations. To this day, I find myself wandering the shops and walking the town's park multiple times a month, usually with a nondescript purpose, or at least one not worthy of remembering past the morning. But where I was and where I went
are like thoughts from a prior day when recalled. Talking to my wife, I was surprised to hear that my descriptions of reoccurrences in detail aren't frequent with others. The news of this scared me and dwindled my hopes of relatability, so much so that I didn't bother furthering the reason I mentioned my dream to begin with. What I failed to explain was that although the town around me has stayed the same, I've also recently started having multiple encounters with the same person. My attention to their presence defined amongst the nameless faces that pass through occupancy without notice. The first time we met, she was dressed as a postal worker. She introduced herself, but it was only the second time that we made contact I'd remember her name. This time, she was dressed as an ice cream worker at the parlor. Approaching the counter, she says, "You're back. Remember me from last time?" I pause, study her features. I can't help but feel like I do somehow remember this person. She says, "It's Nora." Immersed in a dream state, all of this seemed correct. It's only when I woke up did her question, "Remember me from last time?" really trigger an unnerve within. Eventually, this sensation dulled as the weeks would pass, and my mind again piled up with other thoughts to focus on. My third encounter with Nora was in June. When I saw her, she was wearing a black dress and sitting on a wooden bench across the street from the fountain. I sat down beside her, and Nora tells me there was a funeral today for a member of the community. She says they held a beautiful service and buried him in the cemetery near the park. I say my condolences while also thinking, there's never been a cemetery here. But today, sitting next to Nora, past the fountain, across the street, and just beyond the grass playfield, I see a cemetery in the distance. In pure astonishment, I stand up and begin to make my way across the street. Nora follows closely behind. While using the crosswalks, I notice other townspeople have stopped in place, frozen in what they were doing, but all now glaring at us as we went by. A dog outside the barber shop stands growling, but its body completely still, unshaken by the low vibrations it's expelling. I mention my observation to Nora, and she says, "They're not glaring at us. They're glaring at you, Oliver. They were hurt you didn't attend the funeral. Some are even saying that you did it." I'm awoken by a paw gently patting my face and the meows of my cat eager for breakfast. I'm exhausted the following day, forced to live again on another planes of existence, as if my time asleep was marked invalid by Nora. It would be a month before I found myself returning to the town. It was nighttime there, and the fountain at the roundabout no longer had water spitting from its tiered levels. It was dry, barren of any movement, like the streets surrounding it. I didn't want to be here anymore. The town I once knew to be a warm escape from reality has now become cold and desolate. While I was gone, it looks like Nora's influence had filled the atmosphere. But where had I gone? How could such drastic changes be made without my knowledge? Was I no longer the carpenter of my own thoughts? Were the blueprints of dreams I construct being altered? Altered by another conscious being, sharing the same frequencies as mine? I needed to find Nora. My pace turned into a run as I started frantically going from shop window to shop window, peering in for any sign of her. I didn't have to look far. I saw a glow coming from the graveyard. As I approached, I slowed my run. There was Nora, along with the rest of the townspeople. That glow that I saw was being made by the torches and flashlights the townspeople held while listening to her preach. The closer I got, her shouts became more audible. Then, She extends her arm over the crowd and points in my direction, yelling,
"There he is! Don't let the murderer get away!"
In a synchronized spin, the mob turns to face me. There's nowhere to hide, and that fact makes itself known when the white beam of flashlight washes over me. Blinded, I lift my hand to shade the light from my eyes. I hear footsteps charging me, furiously gaining in remoteness to my position. Again, I run, but this time, my attention is focused on a place to hide. Nora has turned this town against me, but I don't have time to unpack these theories now. I try the door handle to the first shop I reach, and it's unlocked. I dive in and shut the door behind me, trying to make myself as small as possible behind the counter. On my hands and knees, torches make shadows dance across the walls as the crowds chant and scour the area. Cautiously, I lean my head out just enough so that I can see the front window. I watch groups pass by. The ones that weren't holding lights had weapons, and they held on to them tightly. There wasn't a doubt in my mind. If they got a hold of me, they were going to kill me. Orchestrated symphonic bloodshed, being conducted by Nora. Returning to my position behind the counter, I quickly assess the shop has one door in and one door out. If I'm spotted, there's no back exit for me to flee. And considering the constant mob of traffic passing by the front windows, it'll be nearly impossible to leave out that door unnoticed. But my time for planning was cut short, signaled by a ring. I hear the shop door slowly open, jostling the little brass bells stationed on top of its frame. Holding my breath, it sounds like only one pair of feet bending the floorboards as they begin to check corners of the shop. Using the wood creaks as a guide, I track their proximity, and when they start getting closer to the counter, I crawl opposite of their perceived trajectory. The only advantage I have in this situation is surprise. In what manner I utilize this is now detrimental to my survival. With an animalistic instinct, I hop up and I rush the man. Startled, and before he has time to react, my hands get a hold of his head, and I sink my thumbs into his eyes. He falls back, with me on top of him, his shriek abruptly silenced when the back of his skull hits the floor. My thumbs sink deeper as I grind my teeth and try to keep his head in between my hands, like a basketball, desperately trying to deflate the air inside. When his body lets out a final twitch, I roll off of him, feeling sick to my stomach, my hands wet from blood, my lungs burning from the adrenaline. The noise from the altercation surely alerted the others. Now, their accusations justifiably righteous to uphold. Just beside the lifeless body, I saw a meat cleaver. I wiped my bloody palms on my jeans and went to retrieve the blade from his hip. A shoelace is used to tie the meat cleaver to his wrist. Untying the knot, I fasten it to my own wrist and stay in the shadows while making my way to the front door. One last heavy breath of air enters and leaves my body while preparing to open the door and run for my life. To where? I don't know. The town I once knew now glows with a clarity unattached from safety. Reaching up, I hold the brass bell in my hand and open the door from under it. Exiting the shop, the door swings closed behind me, and before the bell has an opportunity to ring again, I'm already sprinting down the block. I hear a voice call out, "There he goes!" And the townspeople begin their chase. I'm like a fox in the hunt, their pursuit gaining on mine, only measured by volume, as I do not dare to sacrifice momentum for glancing over my shoulder. I reach the outskirts of the unnamed town, the point at which I always find myself arriving, but have never thought about turning around to see what was south. There's no slowing down as I cross the invisible border separating the town and uncharted territory. In front of me, the road swallowed by a dense fog. Only now do I swiftly look back to see I'm no longer being chased. Instead, I see Nora, standing front and center at the town's border with the angry mob now behind her. No longer being chased, I turn around and face Nora from the fog. She smiles and says, "We'll get you next time." The fog engulfs me. And when I open my eyes again, I'm staring at the dark ceiling of my bedroom. My heart is racing, my pillow soaked in sweat. Looking over at the clock, it's around 4 a.m. My wife is still asleep next to me, but for obvious reasons, I'm unable to close my eyes. I stay awake and walk upstairs, marking the first of many sleepless nights and even more exhausted mornings. Since that night, I'm genuinely terrified to wake up and find myself back in that town with Nora. Fear of sleep is draining me. The tightly wound strings of my reality have frayed, no longer joining as one, both strands equally representing an unraveled end rather than a beginning. I'm at a loss for what to do next because it's not a question of if I go back, as much as it's a question of when. And more so, will I have the strength to defend myself next time?
I grew up in a quiet suburb outside of Houston. Some people talk about neighborhoods where people don't lock their doors. This wasn't that kind of neighborhood. Situations in Houston notoriously went from 0 to 100 quickly. So while the neighborhood was basically quiet, doors were locked and checked religiously. That said, 90% of the time, the big neighborhood problems would be teens vandalizing or car break-ins. Annoying, but not scary. I worked retail at a clothing store that closed at 9. I worked with a woman that I was getting to be friends with and who asked if I could give her a ride home. It was a little out of the way, but I didn't mind. Her neighborhood was pretty sketchy. I don't know if that has anything to do with what happened later, but I drove her to her apartment and we sat in the car and chatted until she was ready to head inside. I sat in the car to watch her go inside. Around me, other residents were outside drinking and shooting the shit. It was around 10, so it would have been late for my neighborhood to be outside talking at the volume like this on a weeknight. But it was expected at this place, so I didn't think much of it. When she got inside, she blinked the lights a couple of times to let me know she was in safe, and I headed for my childhood home. I should note that this was a time before cell phones, so this was a kind of basic routine. I was to call her from my house once I got home, and everyone would be confirmed safe. I don't remember the drive home, really. I probably blasted tunes and sang along as I usually did, and parked in the driveway. The outside lights were on. Mom was good about turning them on for me, so I went inside with no fuss. Now, a note about my parents. They weren't mean drunks, but they were alcoholics. They still functioned okay by day, but it wasn't uncommon for me to arrive upon a scene as I did that night, with all the lights on, the TV going, and Mom passed out on the couch. Dad was presumably in the bedroom or passed out in his man cave. From experience, I also knew that if I turned off the lights or the TV, Mom would wake up and be grouchy about me waking her up. So I left everything as it was and I headed to the bathroom to brush my teeth and wash up before bed. Once in my room, changed for bed, I called my friend to let her know I was home, and all was well.
One of my more annoying habits is that it's almost impossible for me to end a conversation. I'm tired as hell and I just want to read a book or something, but instead we're just rambling at each other about work things or whatever. I'd already gotten into bed and turned the lights out. I was just laying in bed, in the dark, listening to my friend, rambling. My room was at the front of the house. It had a weird wall in front of the window, some stylistic mid-century modern thing that didn't make a ton of sense, but did block out some of the light from the headlights when cars would pass. Ours wasn't a high-trafficked road, but cars driving by and a square pattern of lights on the upper part of my wall wasn't an unusual sight. What was unusual, though, were specific beams of light bouncing around the upper part of the wall to the ceiling, and I stared at them for a moment before realizing they were flashlights. That was highly unusual, but I figured it was kids. I wasn't the sort of kid that other kids bullied or pranked. We never had our house teepeed, and I couldn't imagine anyone would want to now that we'd all graduated. I really needed to sleep because I had college finals the next day, and yet flashlights around the house was super weird. My friend told me to call the police, but for a variety of reasons, I'm just not a fan. Besides, carrying flashlights in my front yard isn't a crime, so I couldn't imagine what the police would do. I see well in the dark, and besides, the lights in the living room were still on. So, still on the phone, but without turning on extra lights, I got up with the intent to check the front door. I really don't remember how long my friend and I were on the phone rambling. It had to be a while for what happened next to have happened. I get to the living room, but I hear something in the kitchen. It's this weird metallic slapping sound that makes no sense at all. I tell my friend and she continues to caution me to call the police. But for what? Flashlights? Metal sounds? The kitchen lights are also on, so you have to picture it. A brightly lit living room with a woman passed out on the couch. The TV is on, the kitchen lights are on, but not the dining room. But for all intents and purposes, this looks like a house where people are awake. Except for my mom, who is very clearly dead to the world. So I head toward the sound. At the very end of the kitchen, there's a smallish window with metal blinds. The blinds are closed, but they're rattling, making that weird metallic slapping noise. And I think, is the window open? We are not a window-opening people. I know some people in the South open their windows on a nice evening, but that is not us. Sometimes windows are open temporarily when Mom would pass out while cooking dinner and something burned, but it was always for a fixed amount of time. It was possible that she left the window open, but unlikely. So I just stood there, staring at it, head cocked like a curious dog. And then I saw the front of a shoe on the sill. I screamed. Actually, just saying that I screamed way understates the noise that I made. I'm a notorious low talker, and I assume that I'd been saving all of that volume for this precise moment. I wailed. I cried. I keened. I became a banshee and threw all of my power into my voice in this mighty force. The foot vanished. My mom woke. My friend screamed on the phone with me. From the back of the house, my dad came bounding out with his gun. I got off the phone and called the police. I grabbed another gun and headed outside behind my dad. I'm not a gun person, and going outside was super stupid, but the scream to end all screams had apparently done its job, and no one was there. Being kind of an expert in criminology due to watching police shows, I told everyone to stay away from the sill so the police could investigate it. I had visions of them making fingerprints and molding the shoe prints to find the culprit. Adorable. The police arrived an hour and a half later, so it's good we weren't actually under attack. In the meantime, my mom started to doubt that I'd seen anything,
and started to believe that she'd left the window open. But no. The police verified that the window had been pried open, that whomever it was very carefully took all of the bric-a-brac that decorated the sill and set it on the ground, as if trying to remain very quiet. At no point before this did I consider what the invaders' plan was. Maybe it was shock or lack of imagination, or just being tired, but they knew that it was a full house and they were sneaking in. These weren't robbers who just wanted to take some electronics for quick cash. They were going to take us by surprise. To do what? Thoroughly chilled, I asked when they were going to take the fingerprints, and the cop basically laughed me off because nothing was stolen. We locked down the windows, and I stayed up all night, trying not to imagine what exactly those people were going to do to us. Okay, warning. If you're squeamish, this story is not for you. Like, not at all. It's about my first lesbian experience. I was in college, extremely intoxicated. We went back to her place and we hooked up. The next morning, still groggy, definitely hungover, I get off her mattress and find my coat that I threw into the darkness upon entering last night. When I pick it up and shake it off, it's covered in ants. Then, it gets worse. Walking back into her room to ask if this ant problem is normal, she says, "Yeah, they just keep coming back." Then, I noticed that everywhere I looked, there was another kind of bug crawling on some surface. Roaches in the kitchen, tiny ants on the ceiling. I'm starting to get physically nauseous at the fact that I've spent the night here, and when I return home, I discover hundreds of tiny bites up my legs, my back, my wrists. A couple of days later, I also discovered that my dorm room was infested with bed bugs. I wonder where they got those from. What do you think is the worst part? Actually having the bed bugs, or being humiliated by your RA in front of your dorm mates who now have to strip and wash every piece of fabric they own and find temporary housing because you had a one-night stand with a real dirtball? I'm surprised I didn't get a UTI or worse. Ladies, glamour tip number 246. Don't hook up on a mattress infested with bugs. And to Bug Girl, let's never meet again. My friend likes to go mushroom foraging, and one time, she brought me with her. We got further and further into the woods, getting distracted by cool rocks, different mushrooms, a cool stick, or even just by talking. We were having a great time, just the two of us, until we stumbled into a clearing where a man was sitting, skinning what looked like a deer. I was frozen for a second. I mean, I moved to this yeehaw-ass town about 1.5 years ago. I'm from the Bronx, where you see weird shit, but I'm definitely not used to hunting culture. My friend and I were just sort of frozen. The man looked up, covered in blood, and said, "You know it's not safe for girls like you out here, right?" Then he let out a raspy laugh, instantly chilling my bones. He picked up his frighteningly large knife and just kept skinning the deer and muttering about all the dangerous animals in these woods. My friend and I were just nodding, not sure what else to do or say. He looked back up at us and he said,
There's the bears, sure, the mountain lions, the fisher cats, and the rabid coons. But the most dangerous thing out here? He leaned forward and pointed the knife. Man, the most dangerous game there is. My friend and I made eye contact and just booked it. Through the woods, through the bushes and thorns. And eventually we found our way back to her property. Not sure if creepy hunter guy was just scaring us for shits and giggles, but fuck, it was creepy. I'd like to think that he just got some fun out of scaring two teenagers, but Jesus Christ, not in the mood for this dude to pull a frickin' Robert Hansen. I've traveled alone through the U.S. many times. This has given me many opportunities to live through some absolutely bizarre situations. I've had 2 different encounters where I thought I was about to enter the nightmare of my life. The first, I was camping near Tsuke, about an hour from Santa Fe, on a weeknight. It was cold, and I was supposed to leave early in the morning for Texas, and it was forecasted to snow. Being the young genius that I was, I slept in my Jeep to negate all of this. Middle of the night, an SUV quite literally skids to a stop across the gravel into my campground. This wakes me up, and I'm obviously on edge. This SUV is blasting mariachi music, incredibly odd, but I figured these people were just drunks or high. The doors open and these people get out, and they start running through the woods, screaming bloody murder. I mean, these people sounded like they're gonna die. I'm at an absolute, utter loss. After maybe a minute or 2, everything gets quiet suddenly, and I don't hear them anymore. Tucked into my sleeping bag, I'm starting to absolutely crap myself. I'm sitting there, cramped up in the back of my Jeep, wishing and praying them away. I don't know how long it was. I didn't dare look at my phone. But eventually, I heard quiet voices around my Jeep. The only thing I really caught was, "Do you think somebody's in there?" As you can imagine, I absolutely lost my cool. I just started screaming and I crawled as fast as I could to the front seat. I turned the lights on, and I start the ignition. As I look up, I see these people scattering away like roaches into the trees and down the mountainside. Ever since, I keep a J-frame revolver in my center console whenever I travel. My state permit is recognized in a lot of places, so it's a nice luxury to have. The second one, this was in the city of Little Rock, Arkansas. I was headed to Oklahoma from the East Coast to visit my family for Christmas. I was too cheap to pay for a hotel, so I got off I-40, parked behind a hotel, and slept in my Jeep. Middle of the night, I got woken up by the sound of a small scraping noise. Confused, I open my eyes, and I see a figure outside, attempting to work the zipper on my soft top. Horrified, I simply sat there. It wasn't until he or she managed to stick their hand through the small opening they'd created that I reached out, grabbed the nearest thing to me, which was a Coleman lantern, and I smashed their hand with it. Without waiting to see the result of this, I jumped to the front seat, worked the ignition, and peeled out of that hotel parking lot faster than I think I've ever left anywhere. I didn't stop for gas, red lights, breakfast, anything. I merged straight onto I-40 and continued west for almost 30 miles. Needless to say, that was one of the last times I ever slept in my Jeep. So my parents introduced me to a murderer, Well, a man capable of murder, and we didn't know just yet. He was a down-to-earth stoner with 3 kids and another one on the way, and with a super sweet wife who was also a little crazy. He came over and would tell my parents everything going on in his life, and then disappear for a few days. He always came back with some crazy stories, but never would assume anything bad about him. He'd tell us how his wife stabbed him in the foot, how the kids dug a hole in their trailer, that his mother-in-law was psycho. Once he came over, on the run, for having a gun at his mother-in-law's. He was there and gone in 5 minutes. I regularly check our state circuit court, and dude was never in legal trouble when I looked him up. So I just assumed that he had family issues and maybe a couple screws loose. Last time I saw him, he came over, smoked with my mom and my girl, told us how excited he was for this baby on the way, and he hoped that it looked more like him, as the last one was a clone of his mama. We all hung out together outside and drove the kids around on the ATV, bullshitting about our pasts and futures. He was hopeful. Not a bone in his body said aggressive. He was very empathetic, very family-oriented, and just kind. And then he went missing for 2 weeks. Not a peep from him or the wife. We then see his picture on the news with the title, "Murderer Takes Own Life," with his name attached. He apparently killed a man, took his body and dumped it, and when the police tried talking to him while he was in the car, he turned, looked at the police, and shot himself. I'm so confused, and I'll never even hear the full story. 2 dead men, no closure for anyone. I'll forever wonder, who else that I know is capable of murder? It was the early 90s, and I was 17 or 18. I'd moved out of my parents' house not long before to not the safest of cities. I was a handful at the time and clashing heads a lot with my parents. I had a great paying job for my age, $16 an hour, and rent was low, $350, so I moved out. Anyway, my best friend and I would go for blunt rides around the city when we were bored. Back in the early 90s, the streets were pretty scenic with crackheads and corner boys. I stupidly had very little fear, and we were used to it. I was driving, we were both pretty smoked out. She was also drinking some sort of liquor straight from the bottle. We'd gone through a yellow light on one of the main roads when I noticed the car behind us had a police light on the roof and was flashing their headlights at me. Oh, fuck. My friend starts freaking out, shoving the bottle under her seat, almost already in tears. Back then, there were undercovers everywhere, so I didn't think twice about it. I pulled to the side of the pretty busy street. I was hiding the blunt and watching the driver take the light off of his roof and start walking towards us. He tells me that he's seen us driving up and down the streets looking for drugs and demands our IDs. He's leaning in and he's close to my face, looking back and forth at the both of us and sniffing the air. Really big guy, kinda unkempt. We fish out our IDs and hand them to him. He tells us that we're in big trouble. In my rebellious, dumb head, I'm thinking, what the fuck for what? We weren't looking for drugs, just joyriding around, smoking some weed. He goes back to his car. By then, my friend is a puddle of tears. She's no angel either. She was just drunk and high and freaking out. He finally comes back and tells us that he talked to his partner. There's another man in his car. And his partner decided to take it easy on us. He said he would let us go with a warning if we gave him all of our weed and went home. I remember quickly calculating the situation. Plain clothes, undercover car, just wants our weed. Shit didn't add up. Just at that moment, an actual police car was driving by on the other side of the street. The guy saw it too and stepped back a little. I just reacted and opened the door and went to the middle of the street waving my arms at the cop car. I remember the look on the guy's face, like a confused, caught kid with nowhere to go. The cops were coming to a light and not going very fast. They stopped right there and I just started asking them before they could say anything. "Is this guy a real cop?" They looked confused. The guy looked like he didn't know what to do. I was yelling to the real cops that this guy said he was a cop and pulled us over. Guy started fast walking back to his car and partner. The cops left their car in the middle of the street and went after him. They got him. More cops showed up. My high is completely gone. The fake cops' car is swarmed. I finally see them both being taken to a cop car in cuffs. The cop that originally stopped came back to my car with our IDs and explained to us that this wasn't the first time these guys had pulled their fake cop act. He asked me if I was okay to drive home, took our information, and said that they would be in touch. I was shaken, but more mad than anything. We went back to my apartment, and that was that. I had a habit of checking out the police logs and court sentencing in the local paper. I found the guy's court appearance, which also contained a mugshot, and a short article about how many times he had done the same thing to other women. The danger that we could have been in didn't really sink into my stupid teenage brain until I read that he had stabbed 2 of those young women. I still remember his face and his name. The court record said that he got a 20-year sentence. I wasn't a big fan of police back then, but thank God they just so happened to be driving by.